Hello, students. We are together at the chapter summary of our foreign trade course book. We are dealing with the summary of chapter 4, titled Post-Heckscher-Ohlin Theories. In the fourth chapter of our book, we are dealing with the post-Heckscher-Ohlin theories, or the theories which are developed after the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. In some books or in some references, you can see that they are referred as new trade theories. So in our international trade theory literature, the new trade theories mean the post-Heckscher-Ohlin theories. Here is the chapter outline. The chapter consists of four titles. The first title is the weaknesses of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. The second title is the demand-oriented model of international trade. The third title is effects of technological differences on international trade, and the fourth title is the international trade under economies of scale and imperfect competition. Regarding the weaknesses of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, it is insufficient to explain a large part of today's international trade. Why is it so? The reason of this insufficiency is unrealistic simplifying assumptions of the theory. As I have told you when I was giving the summary of the third chapter, that we refer to 12 simplifying assumptions of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, or we explain the Heckscher-Ohlin theory depending on the 12 simplifying assumptions. And the reason of this insufficiency in explaining today's international trade by the Heckscher-Ohlin theory is because of the weaknesses of these simplifying assumptions. So new trade theories are developing by relaxing or by leaving the simplifying assumptions of the Heckscher-Ohlin theory. And another weakness, which is very important, is that Heckscher-Ohlin theory is a supply-sided theory. In other words, it does not take into account the demand preferences of the countries. It only considers the supply, or it tries to explain, or it explains international trade and the comparative advantage, which is the basis of international trade, is explained by the supply, or only by looking at the production of the trading countries. Demand was not considered. So that was one of the main weaknesses of the theory. In order to compensate this, or in order to overcome this weakness, we have demand-oriented models today in explaining the international trade. And the most referred demand-oriented model of international trade is the overlapping demands model. And it is also referred as Linder model because Linder was the economist who improved this overlapping demands model. Linder model explains international trade depending upon the demand preferences and income similarities. And I should add that the model analyzes international trade in manufactured commodities only. In other words, we cannot analyze international trade in agricultural commodities or in raw materials, depending on the Linder model. Then the third title deals with the effects of technological differences on international trade. We know that under the Heckscher-Ohlin theory, we assume that technology or technology levels of the trading countries are the same or are identical. Or in other words, technology is not a variable in our model. But of course, it is not realistic if we consider our international world trade or today. So this we all know that technology can be the sole or the unique basis for the competitive advantage for the countries today. So we have models that take into consider the differences in technology and technological improvements. Effects of technological differences on the international trade are best explained by the product cycle model. Or, today we have some other models as well, but the mostly referred one is still the product cycle model. And the new studies are mostly depend on this product cycle model. The model rests on the recognition of dynamic changes that affect the manufactured commodities. So, in other words, the model takes into consider the dynamic comparative advantages. Well, let's see the fundamentals of the product cycle model. We have two countries, and one of the countries is innovating country, and the other one is the imitating country. Innovating country in our model is the country which innovates or which invents a new product. And the imitating country is the country which imitates this new product after a while. The second fundamental is a new product, which I have already mentioned. So this new product is produced or innovated by the innovating country. And according to the product cycle model, there are 5 stages in production. And again, as I have mentioned before, the model rests on the dynamic comparative advantages. What's the meaning of dynamic comparative advantages? It takes into consider the time and changes in the comparative advantages in time for the countries. Until now, the previous models, the previous international trade theory models, took into effect or have taken into consideration the static comparative advantages, meaning that they did not take into consider the time and its effect on the comparative advantages. So that's something new for the international trade theory. That was the first model which has taken into consideration the dynamic comparative advantages. The fourth title in our chapter 4 is the international trade under economies of scale and imperfect competition. Previous trade models have assumed constant returns to scale. It means that when we increase the inputs or when we increase the factors of production, the outcome increases in the same proportion. So this is referred to or referred as constant returns to scale. However, economies of scale exist in some industries today which are subject to international trade. So today in most of the industries we have positive economies of scale, and then it is by itself a source or a basis of a comparative advantage of the countries. So it means that we have to be aware of these new models, which refers to the economies of scale, positive economies of scale. Economies of scale exist when the increase in output is proportionately more than the increase in input. Here we should correct this mistake. Here it should be written input. So I can give an example to practice the economies of scale in this respect. Suppose that in the production of a commodity, we double the factors of production. If we have an output which is more than doubled, then we have positive economies of scale here. Economies of scale is divided into two parts, or can be explained into two parts. One part is the internal economies of scale, and the other one is the external economies of scale. In the internal economies of scale, if the economies of scale is realized due to the increase or due to the reasons internal to the firm, then, or peculiar to the firm, then we have the internal economies of scale. But the economies of scale can persist due to the increase in the scale of the industry. Then in this case we have an external economies of scale. This is a very brief summary of our fourth chapter. I'm sure that you will follow the course book to study and the other materials which are produced for you.